The rice was cold again, and this time, Baek Sungmo didn't mind at all. He sat at Ndidi's small kitchen table on a quiet Sunday evening, 6 months into a relationship that had begun with a wrong number, and somehow, against every reasonable expectation, become the center of his entire life. Emeka sat in his lap, no longer just throwing forks, but now attempting, with great seriousness, to teach Sungmo the correct way to eat rice like a big boy, while Kemi narrated an elaborate story about her class hamster from the next chair over. It was, by every measure Sungmo could think to apply, an ordinary, wonderful evening. Then Dara, 5 years old and prone to the particular bluntness of small children, looked up from her plate and asked the question that stopped the entire table cold. "Uncle Sungmo," she said, "are you the real Bio now? Or is Uncle Bio still the real one?" Silence fell hard and sudden. Ndidi's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Kemi glanced quickly between her mother and Sungmo, old enough now, at 8, to sense that something significant had just been asked, even if she didn't fully understand why. "Dara," Ndidi said carefully, "why are you asking that?" "Because everyone keeps saying different things," Dara said, entirely unbothered by the sudden tension her question had created. Uncle Bio used to be the one on the phone at night. Then it was Uncle Sungmo. And now Uncle Sungmo comes for dinner all the time, but Uncle Bio still drives us to school sometimes, and I don't understand who's actually supposed to be here. Sungmo set down his own fork slowly, meeting Ndidi's eyes across the table, both of them understanding, in that single shared glance. That 6 months of careful, gentle avoidance had just run directly into the honest confusion of a 5-year-old who deserved a real answer. "That's a fair question," Sungmo said carefully, choosing his words with the same precision he'd once used to navigate hostile business negotiations, though this felt considerably higher stakes. "Would it help if your mom explained the whole story properly? All of it, from the beginning?" Ndidi looked at her daughter, then at her son still contentedly eating rice off Sungmo's plate, then finally at Sungmo himself, something resolved settling into her expression. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think it's time everyone actually understood the whole story. Properly, all the way through, no more pieces left out to protect anyone's feelings." She reached for Dara's hand, then Kemi's, drawing both girls closer. "Your father," she said slowly, "my husband, was named Bio too. Uncle Bio's brother. He died 4 years ago, in an accident, before Emeka was even born." Her voice wavered slightly, 4 years of carefully managed grief finally being spoken plainly in front of her children for the first time. "Uncle Bio has been helping take care of us ever since, quietly, because he loved his brother, and because he didn't want us to lose the support we needed. I didn't always understand, back then, exactly how much he was doing, or exactly why. There was some confusion, for a while, about who I thought I was talking to on the phone at night." Kemi's eyes widened slowly, pieces visibly assembling themselves in her 8-year-old mind. "So Daddy's been gone this whole time? Since before Emeka?" "Yes, baby," Ndidi said softly. "I'm sorry it took me this long to explain it properly." The table went quiet, the particular heavy, delicate silence of children processing something enormous, before Dara, with the resilient, matter-of-fact clarity children often possess, simply nodded. "Okay," she said. "So Uncle Sungmo isn't the real Bio. He's just Uncle Sungmo. That's fine too." Despite the weight of the moment, Sungmo felt something in his chest loosen slightly at her simple, uncomplicated acceptance. "That's exactly right," he said. "I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm just here because I love your mom. And I love all 3 of you, exactly as myself." Emeka, entirely unaware of the gravity of the conversation happening around him, chose that moment to fling a spoonful of rice directly at Sungmo's shirt, which broke the tension in the room more effectively than anything else could have. "He's still got the arm," Sungmo said, laughing despite himself, wiping rice from his collar. "Gets it from his father," Ndidi said quietly, though this time, for the first time in 4 years, saying it out loud didn't carry quite the same weight of carefully hidden grief. Later that night, once the children were asleep, Sungmo and Ndidi sat together on her small couch, the honest conversation of dinner still settling between them. "Thank you," Ndidi said quietly, "for for giving me the space to actually explain it properly. I've been avoiding that conversation for months, telling myself the kids were too young to understand. They understood more than we probably realized, Sungmo said. Kids usually do. Ndidi was quiet for a moment, something more serious entering her expression. There's something else I need to talk to you about, she said. Something that's been on my mind now that tonight's happened. What is it? Bio, she said slowly. Your driver. His brother. I think tonight's conversation is going to be considerably harder for him than it was for the children. Sungmo felt something tighten in his chest. The reality of what 6 months of quiet, careful relationship building had actually meant for the man who'd spent 4 years protecting this family before Sungmo had ever entered the picture. What do you mean? He asked. I mean, Ndidi said carefully, that Bio has been quietly, dutifully filling a role in this family for 4 years, out of love for his brother and love for us. And now that role is changing, publicly, in front of the children, in a way I don't think he's fully prepared for. She met Sungmo's eyes. I think we need to talk to him properly before this becomes something he learns about secondhand, or worse, feels pushed out of entirely. Sungmo nodded slowly, understanding immediately the delicate, significant conversation still ahead of them. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. Bio himself, sending a message that suddenly felt considerably more weighted given what Ndidi had just said. Bio, sir. Can we talk tomorrow? There's something about the kids, about my role in the family, that I think we need to discuss directly. I've been putting it off long enough. Welcome back, everyone. If you watched the first part of this story, thank you for asking for more, and thank you for all your questions. I promise this chapter clears up exactly what you've been wondering. If you're new here, go watch part 1 first. This one won't make full sense without it. Drop your city or country below, as always. Now, I have to tell you honestly, tonight's conversation with Bio is going to reveal something about the last 4 years that even Sungmo doesn't fully understand yet. Stay with me till the end. Subscribe if you don't want to miss it. Okay, let's find out what Bio needs to say. Bio arrived at Sungmo's office the following afternoon, cap in his hands exactly as he had the first time this conversation had forced itself into existence, though the tension in his shoulders now carried a different weight than fear of losing his job. Sir, he said, sitting carefully across from Sungmo's desk. Thank you for making time. Of course, Sungmo said. Ndidi mentioned you two might need to talk. About the kids. About your role in things going forward. Bio nodded slowly, turning his cap over in his hands. Dara told me about dinner last night, he said. About Ndidi finally explaining everything properly. I'm glad she did. I felt guilty for years about how much they didn't fully understand, especially Kemi, old enough now to have real questions. How are you feeling about all of it? Sungmo asked carefully. Honestly, Bao, I want to understand what these past 6 months have actually meant for you, not just assume I already know. Bao was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words with visible difficulty. Complicated, he said finally. I loved my brother very much, sir. When he died, I made a promise to myself that I'd take care of his family, whatever that required. I didn't expect that promise to eventually mean handing part of that role to someone else. I understand if this feels difficult, Sungmo said. I'm not trying to erase 4 years of what you've built with them. I know that, Bio said. Genuinely, sir, I've watched you with those children for 6 months now, and I don't doubt your intentions. But there's something I haven't told you. Something I think you need to understand, given how serious this relationship has become. Sungmo felt a flicker of unease. What is it? Bio took a breath, the particular difficult breath of a man about to reveal something he'd carried alone for a long time. My brother's death wasn't entirely an accident, he said slowly. Not the way the official report described it. The room went very still. What do you mean? Sungmo asked carefully. The construction site where he died, Bio said, was owned by a company with connections to organized crime. Not your organization, sir, a different one, operating in Incheon at the time. My brother had witnessed something he shouldn't have: financial irregularities, safety violations being covered up. the kind of corruption that gets people killed when they threaten to report it. He paused, his voice tightening. He was planning to go to authorities. I found his notes, months later, going through his things. He never got the chance. Sungmo sat frozen, processing the weight of what Bio was actually revealing. You're saying your brother was murdered, made to look like an accident? Yes, Bio said quietly. I've never told Ndidi. I didn't want her carrying that weight on top of everything else she was already managing, raising 3 children alone, believing her husband died in a tragic, random accident, rather than because he tried to do the right thing. He met Sungmo's eyes. I've spent 4 years quietly trying to find proof, sir. Enough to actually hold the people responsible accountable, without exposing Ndidi and the children to danger in the process. Why are you telling me this now? Sungmo asked slowly. Because I think I finally found something. Bio said. Real evidence, not just suspicion. And because, sir, given who you are, given the resources and influence you actually have access to, I think you might be able to help me finish what I started, in a way I've never been capable of on my own. Sungmo leaned back slowly in his chair, the full weight of what Bio was actually asking settling over him. You want my help pursuing this? Formally, with my organization's resources. Yes, Bio said. But I need you to understand something first, sir. If we do this, if we actually pursue justice for my brother properly, it likely means Ndidi eventually needs to know the truth. All of it. And I don't know how she'll handle learning her husband didn't simply die in an accident, but was killed because he tried to do something honorable. Sungmo sat with this, the delicate, complicated weight of loyalty, love, and justice all tangling together in a decision that suddenly felt far larger than a simple conversation about family roles. Show me what you found, he said finally. Everything. And then we'll figure out, together, how to actually handle telling her, if pursuing this proves as real as you believe it is. Bio reached into his jacket, withdrawing a worn folder he'd clearly carried for exactly this moment, and slid it across the desk. Inside were photographs, financial records, a handwritten timeline in his brother's own careful writing evidence, genuinely compelling evidence, of exactly the kind of corruption Bio had described. Sungmo studied the documents carefully, his business mind immediately, methodically identifying the company names, the financial patterns, the particular signatures of organized corruption he recognized from his own years navigating similarly dangerous waters. His stomach dropped as he reached the final page. Bio, he said slowly, do you recognize this company name? Daehan Construction Holdings? Should I? Bio asked, watching Sungmo's expression shift into something grave and careful. It's a shell company, Sungmo said quietly. One I've encountered before, in a business dispute 2 years ago. It's connected, through several layers of ownership, to an organization I have an ongoing, tense relationship with. He looked up at Bio. The full weight of the coincidence settling heavily over both of them. Bio, I think the people responsible for your brother's death may be considerably more connected to my own world than either of us realized. Bio's face went pale. What does that mean, sir, for pursuing this? It means, Sungmo said slowly, that this isn't simply a matter of gathering evidence and handing it to authorities. If Daehan Construction Holdings is connected to who I think it's connected to, pursuing this properly means navigating an extremely delicate, extremely dangerous situation. He paused, studying the documents again with renewed, careful attention. The organization I'm thinking of is run by a man named Yong-sik. We've had disputes before, over shipping routes, though nothing that's escalated to open conflict. If his people were responsible for covering up your brother's murder, exposing that publicly could reignite tensions I've spent years carefully managing. So you're saying we shouldn't pursue it? Bio said, something hard and disappointed entering his voice. I'm saying, Sungmo said carefully, that we need to pursue it intelligently, not recklessly. Your brother deserves justice, Bio. I'm not walking away from that. But if we move carelessly, we risk not just failing to get that justice, but potentially bringing real danger to Ndidi and the children in the process. The exact outcome you've spent 4 years trying to prevent. Bio absorbed this, some of his earlier hardness giving way to genuine, exhausted consideration. What do you propose then? Let me investigate quietly first, Sungmo said. Through my own channels, carefully, without alerting Young-sik's organization that anyone's looking into this. I have resources for exactly this kind of careful, discreet work. Once I understand the full scope of what actually happened and who's actually still vulnerable to exposure, we can decide together how to proceed safely. And Ndidi? Bio asked. When do we tell her? Sungmo considered this carefully. I think, he said slowly, we wait until we actually have something concrete enough to bring her not just suspicion, but real answers, real accountability in motion. Telling her now, with only a folder of unconfirmed documents, risks giving her partial truth that creates more pain than clarity. Bio nodded slowly, though something uncertain remained in his expression. I trust your judgment on the investigation, sir, but I need you to promise me something. What is it? That this doesn't become simply another business calculation for you, Bio said, his voice carrying genuine, raw emotion for the first time in the conversation. My brother wasn't a shipping route or a territory dispute. He was a good man who tried to do the right thing and paid for it with his life. I need to know you're pursuing this because it's right, not simply because it happens to intersect with your own organizational interests. Sungmo met his eyes steadily. I understand completely, he said. And I promise you, Bio, this isn't a calculation to me. I've watched you carry this alone for 4 years, protecting a family that isn't even technically your own out of pure loyalty to your brother's memory. That kind of loyalty deserves more than careful business strategy. It deserves genuine justice. Bio studied him for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, not quite trust. Not fully, but the beginning of something considerably warmer than the wary uncertainty he'd carried into the office. Thank you, sir, he said quietly. Sungmo called Haewon into his office the moment Bio left, sliding the folder across his desk with careful, focused urgency. I need you to investigate this, he said. Quietly, thoroughly, and with extreme discretion. Daehan Construction Holdings and its connections to Young-sik's organization. I believe there may be evidence here of a murder covered up as a workplace accident, 4 years ago. Haewon's eyebrows rose slightly as she reviewed the documents, her sharp analytical mind immediately engaging with the details. This is significant, sir, if this checks out. And if it's genuinely connected to Young-sik's people, this could reignite tensions we've spent considerable effort managing. I know, Sungmo said, which is exactly why I need this handled with absolute discretion. No one outside this office knows we're investigating until we understand the full scope of what we're actually dealing with. Haewon nodded, already mentally organizing the investigation's parameters. I'll begin immediately, sir. Give me a week for a preliminary assessment. The week that followed passed in careful, tense waiting, Sungmo continuing his regular visits to Ndidi and the children, maintaining the easy, warm rhythm they'd built over 6 months, while privately carrying the weight of an investigation that could, depending on what Haewon uncovered, fundamentally reshape everything. Ndidi noticed the shift in him almost immediately. You've been distracted lately, she said one evening, once the children were asleep, studying him with the particular perceptive attention she'd shown him from their very first accidental phone call. Is everything all right? With your business, I mean. Sungmo hesitated, the careful compartmentalization he'd maintained around the investigation suddenly colliding with the honest, transparent relationship he'd been trying to build with her for 6 months. There's something happening, he said slowly, that I'm not ready to fully explain yet. Not because I don't trust you, but because I don't have enough concrete information yet to bring you something that isn't just painful uncertainty. Ndidi studied him carefully, something wary entering her expression. Does it involve Bio? Sungmo's silence answered the question more clearly than words could have. Sungmo, Ndidi said, her voice carrying genuine concern now. If something's happening that involves my brother-in-law, that potentially affects my children, I need you to be honest with me. I've spent 4 years protecting them from uncertainty and half-truths. I can't go back to that, not even for good reasons. Sungmo felt the weight of her words land hard, the careful, protective secrecy he and Bio had agreed to suddenly feeling considerably less defensible against her direct, honest concern. "You're right," he said finally. "I'm sorry. Let me explain what I actually know. Though I need you to understand upfront it's not complete yet, and some of it may be genuinely difficult to hear." He told her everything: Bio's suspicions, the folder of evidence, the possible connection to Yongseki's organization, the careful investigation currently underway. Ndidi sat frozen through the entire explanation, her face cycling through shock, grief, and finally, something harder and more determined. "You're telling me," she said slowly, once he'd finished, "that my husband might have been murdered. That Bio has known, or suspected, for 4 years, and never told me." "He was trying to protect you," Sungmo said carefully. "From additional pain, from potential danger, until he had something concrete enough to actually act on." "That wasn't his decision to make alone," Ndidi said, her voice tight with a fury Sungmo hadn't seen from her before. Months of careful trust suddenly complicated by this new, devastating revelation. "Sungmo, that's my husband, my children's father. Whatever protective instinct motivated that silence, it doesn't change the fact that I've spent 4 years believing something that might be fundamentally untrue, while the people responsible for potentially killing him walked free." "I understand your anger," Sungmo said quietly. "I'm not defending the silence, Ndidi. I'm trying to help you understand the context behind it." Ndidi stood abruptly, pacing the small living room, processing 4 years of grief suddenly, violently recontextualized by this new, uncertain truth. "I need to see Bio," she said finally. "Tonight, I need to hear this directly from him, not filtered through you, however good your intentions." Sungmo nodded slowly, understanding completely. "I'll call him." Bio arrived within the hour, his face carrying the particular dread of a man about to face a conversation he'd spent 4 years avoiding. "Ndidi," he said, the moment he walked through the door, "I am so sorry." "I should have told you, sit down," Ndidi said, her voice carrying a controlled fury that made both men go still. "And tell me everything. All of it, from the very beginning. I've waited 4 years for the truth. I'm done waiting any longer." Bio sat down slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he began, for the first time, to tell Ndidi the full truth he'd carried alone for 4 years. 3 weeks after the funeral, he said, his voice unsteady, "I was going through his things. His work bag, the one they returned to us from the site. There was a notebook, hidden in a lining he'd sewn into the bottom himself, the kind of thing you'd only find if you were specifically looking. Which I only was because something about the official report felt wrong to me from the very beginning." "Wrong how?" Ndidi asked, her voice tight. "The fall," Bio said. "The official report said he fell from scaffolding that had been improperly secured. But I knew my brother, Ndidi. He was the most careful person I've ever known, especially on job sites. He'd worked construction for 12 years without a single serious incident. It didn't make sense to me that he'd simply make a careless mistake that cost him his life." "So, you found the notebook," Ndidi said slowly. "Financial records," Bio continued. "Documentation of safety violations being covered up, workers being paid under the table to stay quiet about unsafe conditions, money being funneled through shell companies to avoid inspection requirements. He'd been documenting it for months, Ndidi. He was planning to go to labor authorities, maybe even the police depending on what he uncovered." Ndidi's hands were shaking now, 4 years of careful, managed grief giving way to something rawer, more devastating. "And you think someone found out? That they killed him to stop him from reporting it?" "I believe so," Bio said quietly. "I've spent 4 years trying to gather enough proof to actually act on this, without endangering you or the children in the process. I hired a private investigator 18 months ago, using my own savings, careful to keep it entirely separate from anything that could be traced back to this family." 18 months, Ndidi repeated, her voice breaking slightly. "You've known something concrete for 18 months, and you never told me." "I was trying to protect you," Bio said, desperation entering his voice now. "Ndidi, if I was wrong, if this turned out to be nothing, I didn't want you carrying the weight of that suspicion for nothing. And if I was right," he stopped, swallowing hard. "If I was right, then the people responsible were dangerous enough to kill a good man simply for trying to do the right thing. I was terrified of what might happen if they realized someone was investigating, especially someone connected to his widow and children. Ndidi stood abruptly, moving to the window, staring out at the darkness with her back to both men, her shoulders shaking with barely contained emotion. 4 years, she said quietly. 4 years, I've told our children their father died in an accident. A tragedy, but simple, senseless, nobody's fault. And this whole time, you've known, or at least suspected, that he was murdered for trying to do something honorable, and you let me keep telling them the wrong story. I know, Bayo said, his own voice breaking now. I know how badly I failed you, keeping this from you. I told myself I was protecting you, but I understand now that I was also protecting myself, from having to watch you carry this pain, from having to be the one who took away whatever peace you'd managed to build around his death. Ndidi turned back to face him, tears streaming freely down her face now. I need to know everything the investigator found, she said. All of it. Bayo, no more protecting me from painful truth. I've earned the right to know exactly what happened to my husband. Bayo nodded, reaching for his phone, pulling up files he'd clearly kept carefully organized for exactly this eventual reckoning. The investigator identified 3 workers who were on site that day, who later received unusually large payments from Dayhan Construction Holdings shortly after the incident. Hush money. Most likely, though we've never been able to get any of them to speak on record. Can they be found? Sungmo asked, speaking for the first time since Ndidi had begun her questioning, his voice carrying the particular focused intensity of a man calculating practical next steps. These workers, are they still in the country, still findable? 2 of them, according to the investigator's most recent update, Bayo said. The 3rd apparently left the country shortly after receiving payment, destination unknown. Sungmo considered this carefully. If Haewon's investigation confirms the connection to Yong-sik's organization, we may have leverage those workers don't currently understand exists. People who take hush money out of fear, rather than loyalty, can often be convinced to tell the truth, given the right circumstances and adequate protection. You'd help with that? Ndidi asked, turning to him, something between hope and continued anger still warring in her expression. Even knowing it could reignite tensions with this Yong-sik person? Yes, Sungmo said simply. Your husband deserves justice, Ndidi. Your children deserve to know the truth about their father, whatever that truth actually is. I'm not willing to let business calculations override that, regardless of the risk involved. Ndidi studied him for a long moment, something complicated shifting behind her tear-filled eyes. I'm still angry, she said quietly. At both of you for different reasons. Bayo, for keeping this from me for so long. You, Sungmo, for knowing for a week and only telling me because I pushed you to. That's fair, Sungmo said. I should have told you immediately, the moment Bayo brought this to me. I let my instinct toward careful strategy override what you actually deserved, which was honesty from the very beginning. Ndidi wiped at her eyes, exhaustion and grief and cautious, fragile hope all tangling together in her expression. I need time to process this, she said. All of it. But I also need this pursued properly, whatever that takes. My husband deserves the truth to actually come out, regardless of how difficult that process turns out to be. I'll make sure it does, Sungmo said quietly. Whatever resources this requires, whatever risks need managing carefully, I promise you, Ndidi, we will find out exactly what happened to him. And we will hold the people responsible accountable. His phone buzzed. Haewon, with an update he'd been anxiously awaiting all week. Text from Haewon. Preliminary investigation complete, sir. The connection to Yong-sik's organization is confirmed. But there's something else you need to know immediately. One of the surviving witnesses, the 2nd worker mentioned in Bayo's file, has just been found dead. Ruled a suicide by local authorities. I don't believe that ruling for a second. Sungmo read the message twice, his stomach dropping with cold, immediate dread. What is it? Ndidi asked, noticing his expression shift. He hesitated only a moment before showing her the message directly, deciding, in that instant, that the promise of complete honesty had to start now. in this exact moment, regardless of how frightening the truth actually was. Nditi's hand flew to her mouth. They killed him too, she said, because someone started asking questions. We don't know that for certain yet, Sungmo said, though his own voice carried little conviction in the words. But I think we have to assume the worst, given the timing. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Bio said, his voice tight with panic. The moment anyone starts actively investigating, people connected to the truth start disappearing. Nditi, this is exactly why I never told you the danger isn't hypothetical anymore. So what do we do? Nditi asked, fear now cutting sharply through her earlier anger. Just stop? Let whoever did this simply get away with murdering 2 people now, instead of 1? No, Sungmo said firmly. But we need to move considerably more carefully than we have been. If Yong Seke's organization is actively eliminating witnesses, that means they're aware, on some level, that this investigation is happening. We need to secure the remaining witness immediately, and we need to ensure all of you are protected while this unfolds. He called Haewon directly. I need full security on the remaining witness, immediately, and I need protection details assigned to Nditi and the children starting tonight. Already in motion, sir, Haewon said. I anticipated this exact escalation the moment the first casualty was confirmed. Teams are being dispatched now. Sungmo turned back to Nditi and Bio, the weight of the escalating danger settling heavily over the room. I need you both to understand something, he said. This is no longer simply about uncovering the truth carefully, on our own timeline. Someone is actively trying to prevent that truth from coming out, and they've already killed once to do it. We're now dealing with a genuine, immediate threat, not just a historical injustice. The children, Nditi said, her voice shaking. Sungmo, if this is genuinely dangerous, I need them protected immediately. I don't care about justice for their father if it costs me their safety. Both things can be true, Sungmo said gently. We can pursue justice and keep them completely safe. That's exactly what Haewon's team is mobilizing to ensure right now. Within the hour, security personnel had arrived at Nditi's apartment, quietly but thoroughly securing the building, while Haewon coordinated remotely to move the surviving witness to a protected location before Yong-sik's people could reach him. Nditi sat with her children that evening, watching them sleep with the particular fierce, protective vigilance of a mother who now understood, with terrifying clarity, that a threat she'd known nothing about had suddenly, violently entered her family's orbit. Sungmo found her there, in the doorway of the children's room, and joined her quietly. I need to ask you something, Nditi said, not looking away from her sleeping children. And I need an honest answer, regardless of how it makes you look. Anything, Sungmo said. Is this partly your fault? She asked quietly. Not the murder, 4 years ago, obviously that predates you entirely. But this escalation, right now. Did investigating this, using your resources, your connections, actually create the danger that's now threatening my children, when perhaps a quieter, slower approach might not have? Sungmo considered the question seriously, refusing to offer her a comfortable answer that wasn't fully honest. Possibly, he admitted. Haewon's investigation was discreet, but investigations connected to organizations like Yong-sik's rarely stay completely invisible. It's possible that beginning this formal investigation accelerated a response we might have avoided by continuing to move as slowly and quietly as Bio had been managing alone for years. He paused. I won't pretend that possibility doesn't weigh on me, Nditi, but I also believe, genuinely, that the truth about your husband's death was always going to require confronting real danger eventually, however carefully anyone approached it. Corruption at this level doesn't simply reveal itself safely. And Nditi absorbed this, something complicated moving behind her exhausted eyes. I need you to promise me something, she said. If this gets more dangerous, if protecting my children ever conflicts directly with pursuing justice for their father, the children come first. Always, regardless of how close we are to answers, regardless of what it costs the investigation itself. I promise, Sungmo said immediately, without hesitation. Their safety will never be a secondary consideration, Nditi, not to me. She nodded slowly, some of the tension in her shoulders easing slightly at the immediate, unwavering certainty in his voice. 3 days later, Haewon's team successfully relocated the surviving witness to a secure facility, and under careful, protected questioning, he finally, fully corroborated everything BIO's private investigator had uncovered, confirming the safety violations, the cover-up, and, critically, confirming that the accident that killed Ndidi's husband had, in fact, been deliberately orchestrated once his intentions to report the corruption became known to Daehan Construction Holdings leadership. He also provided something none of them had anticipated: a name. The specific individual within Youngsik's organization who had ordered the killing, still active, still operating within the organization's current leadership structure. Sungmo stared at the name on Haewon's report, something cold and furious settling into his chest. "Do you recognize him?" Haewon asked, watching his expression carefully. "Yes," Sungmo said slowly. "Unfortunately, I know him quite well. He's Youngsik's second in command. A man I've negotiated directly with, multiple times, over shipping disputes." He looked up at Haewon, the full weight of what this confirmation actually meant settling heavily over him. "This isn't just historical justice anymore, Haewon. This is a direct confrontation with the current leadership of an organization I've spent years carefully avoiding open conflict with." His phone buzzed. "Ndidi. Text from Ndidi. The kids are asking why there are new people watching our building. I don't know what to tell them. Can you come over? I think it's time we talk to them together, honestly, about what's actually happening." Sungmo looked at the message, then at the name on Haewon's report, understanding that, within the next few days, he would need to make a decision that could either finally deliver the justice BIO had spent 4 years quietly pursuing, or plunge his entire organization into exactly the kind of dangerous, open conflict he'd spent his career carefully avoiding. He arrived at Ndidi's apartment within the hour, finding her in the kitchen with all 3 children gathered around the table, their faces carrying the particular solemn confusion of children who understood something serious was happening without fully grasping what. "I told them a little," Ndidi said quietly, meeting his eyes over their heads, "that we're keeping extra careful right now, that the people outside are helping keep us safe. But I think they deserve more than that, Sungmo. I think, given everything, they deserve at least an age-appropriate version of the truth." Sungmo sat down at the table, considering carefully how to approach what came next. Kemi, old enough now at 8 to understand considerably more than her younger siblings, watched him with sharp, worried attention. "Is this about Daddy?" she asked directly. "Uncle Bio's been acting strange since that dinner. And now there are guards outside." Ndidi and Sungmo exchanged a glance, both recognizing that Kami's directness had once again cut straight through whatever careful approach they might have planned. "Yes," Ndidi said slowly. "It's about your father. We've learned some things recently that suggest what happened to him wasn't simply an accident, the way we always believed." "What do you mean?" Kemi asked, her small face carrying an intensity that made Sungmo's chest ache. "We think," Ndidi said carefully, "that some people did something wrong, and that your father got hurt because he was trying to stop them. We're working very hard right now to find out exactly what happened, and to make sure the people responsible are held accountable." "Is that why there are guards?" Kemi asked. "Because those people might still be dangerous?" "Yes," Sungmo said honestly, deciding the child deserved a direct answer rather than careful deflection. "We're being extra careful right now, to make sure all of you stay completely safe while we figure out the rest of the truth." Dara, listening intently despite being younger, reached for her mother's hand. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked, her small voice carrying genuine fear. "Yes, baby," Ndidi said firmly, pulling her close. "I promise you, we are going to be completely okay. Uncle Sungmo and Uncle Bio and a lot of very capable people are working hard to make sure of that." Emeka, too young to fully understand the conversation, simply climbed into Sungmo's lap. Apparently sensing the tension in the room and seeking comfort in the most familiar adult presence available, Sungmo held him gently, something fierce and protective settling over his chest as he looked around at this family, not his by blood, not even fully his by choice initially, but somehow, over 6 complicated months, entirely, irrevocably his to protect. That evening, once the children were finally settled, Sungmo called an emergency meeting with Haewon and his most trusted lieutenants, the weight of the decision ahead of him finally crystallizing into something he could no longer delay. "I need everyone's honest assessment," he said, once they were gathered in his private study. "If we move forward with formally exposing Young-sik's second-in-command for ordering this murder, what does that actually cost us, organizationally?" Haewon spoke first. "Significant risk of open conflict, sir. Young-sik will likely view public exposure of his second-in-command as a direct attack on his organization's stability, regardless of the legitimate justice involved. We should expect retaliation, possibly severe. But if we don't move forward," Sungmo pressed, "if we quietly bury this, protect the family, but never formally pursue accountability, then a murderer continues operating freely within a rival organization," one of his senior lieutenants said grimly, "and everyone in our own organization who eventually learns the full story understands that you chose business convenience over genuine justice, even for someone connected directly to your own household. That has its own significant cost, sir, to trust, to loyalty, to exactly the kind of reputation that's kept this organization stable through previous crises." Sungmo sat with this, weighing every angle with the same careful precision he'd once applied purely to business calculations, now inseparably tangled with the genuine personal stakes of protecting Ndidi and her children. "There's a third option," Haewon said carefully. "Not full public exposure, immediately, but strategic leverage. We have enough evidence now to approach Young-sik directly, privately, and present him with a choice: handle this internally, removing his second-in-command from any position of power, quietly but definitively, or risk us exposing everything publicly, which would likely destabilize his entire organization far more severely than a quiet internal correction." Sungmo considered this carefully. "You're suggesting we let Young-sik handle his own house cleaning, rather than forcing open conflict?" "I'm suggesting," Haewon said, "that this gives you genuine leverage to secure real justice: removal of a murderer from power, acknowledgement of what actually happened, without necessarily triggering the kind of open, catastrophic conflict that benefits absolutely no one, least of all Ndidi and her children, who would bear significant risk during any prolonged organizational war." Sungmo nodded slowly, the path forward finally, clearly crystallizing. "Arrange a meeting with Young-sik," he said. "Private, immediate. I want to present this evidence directly and give him the choice Haewon's outlined, before this escalates any further." The meeting was arranged for the following evening, and Sungmo arrived at the neutral location Young-sik had specified with the full weight of Ndidi's family's safety, and the delicate balance of two organizations' stability, resting entirely on how carefully he handled the next hour. Young-sik was already seated when Sungmo entered, his expression carrying the particular wary alertness of a man who understood this meeting concerned something significant. "Sungmo," Young-sik said, "your request for an urgent private meeting was unusual enough that I assumed something serious had occurred." "It has," Sungmo said, sitting across from him, sliding the folder of evidence across the table with careful, deliberate precision. 4 years ago, a construction worker named Bio died at a site connected to Daehan Construction Holdings. I have substantial evidence that his death was not an accident, but a deliberate murder, ordered by your second-in-command, to prevent him from reporting safety violations and financial corruption." Young-sik's expression shifted rapidly through surprise, careful calculation, and finally something harder, more guarded, as he reviewed the documents Sungmo had provided. "This is a serious accusation," Young-sik said slowly, "with significant implications if true." "It's not simply an accusation," Sungmo said. "It's thoroughly documented, corroborated by a surviving witness currently under my protection." "I have no interest in using this to destabilize your organization publicly, Young-sik. But I do require justice for this family, and I require it in a way that doesn't put them at further risk." Young-sik studied the documents for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before finally looking up at Sungmo with something calculating and careful. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. Your second in command is removed from any position of power within your organization, Sungmo said, quietly, definitively, and permanently. I don't require public exposure. I don't require his death, or anything that would trigger further violence. I require accountability, and I require it in a way that guarantees no further threat to the widow and children he's already devastated once. Young-sik considered this carefully, the calculation behind his eyes visible even through his practiced composure. And if I refuse, then I take everything I have, the documentation, the witness testimony, all of it public and formal, through channels neither of us can control once they're set in motion. Sungmo said. I understand what that would cost your organization's stability, Young-sik. I genuinely prefer not to trigger that outcome. But I want you to understand clearly, I am fully prepared to, if this family's justice requires it. Young-sik was quiet for a long moment, studying Sungmo with an expression that mixed genuine respect with careful, wary calculation. You've changed, he observed finally, since our last negotiation over the northern shipping routes. You were considerably more purely strategic then. Circumstances have changed, Sungmo said simply. I've learned that some things matter more than pure strategy. Young-sik nodded slowly, something almost respecting entering his careful expression. I'll investigate this myself, he said finally. Discreetly, if your evidence holds up to my own scrutiny, and I suspect it will. Given the thoroughness you've clearly applied, I'll handle this internally, exactly as you've proposed. Quietly, permanently, I need more than an intention to investigate, Sungmo said firmly. I need a timeline, and I need confirmation once it's resolved. 1 week, Young-sik said. For the investigation and the resolution both. You'll have confirmation directly from me, personally, once it's handled. Sungmo studied him for a long moment, weighing the genuine risk of trusting Young-sik's word against the alternative of forcing immediate, catastrophic conflict. 1 week, he agreed finally. But Young-sik, if this isn't resolved properly, if I have any reason to believe you're simply protecting your own organization's stability rather than delivering genuine accountability, I will pursue this publicly, regardless of the cost to either of our organizations. Understood, Young-sik said. For what it's worth, Sungmo, I did not know about this. I take corruption within my own ranks seriously, particularly corruption that leads to murdering an innocent man. This will be handled properly. The week that followed passed in tense, careful waiting. Sungmo maintaining constant vigilance around Ndidi and the children, while Haewon's contacts quietly monitored developments within Young-sik's organization for any sign of the promised resolution. On the 6th day, Young-sik contacted Sungmo directly. Text from Young-sik, it's handled. My former second in command has been removed from all positions of authority, effective immediately, and relocated to a location where he'll pose no further threat to anyone. I've also arranged for a formal, documented confession regarding his role in Bio's death, which I'm sending to you now, sufficient for the family's own private records and closure, though I trust you'll handle its use with appropriate discretion given our agreement. Sungmo read the message with profound, complicated relief, immediately forwarding the confession documentation to Ndidi, with a simple message asking her to come to his office when she was ready. She arrived within the hour, and Sungmo watched her read through the confession slowly, methodically, tears streaming silently down her face, as she finally, after 4 years, held genuine, documented truth about exactly what had happened to her husband. It's real, she said quietly, once she'd finished. It's actually, finally real. Not just suspicion, not just Bio's careful theory. Real, documented truth. It's real, Sungmo confirmed gently. The man responsible has been removed from any position of power. He'll never harm anyone again. Ndidi looked up at him, something profound and grateful moving through her exhausted, tear-streaked expression. You did this, she said. You actually did this. For us. We did this, Sungmo corrected gently. You, Bio, Haewon, all of us together. I simply had the resources to help finish what Bio started 4 years ago. Alone, out of pure love for his brother. 3 months later, on a warm Saturday afternoon, Sungmo stood in Indidi's now considerably more spacious apartment, an upgrade he'd quietly, carefully arranged once the danger had fully passed, insisting it was simply practical given how much time he now spent there. Though everyone understood it represented something considerably more permanent than practicality alone. Bio sat at the kitchen table, considerably more at ease than he'd been in months, watching Emeka attempt, with great seriousness, to teach him the correct way to eat rice, exactly as he'd once taught Sungmo. "Uncle Bio," Dara announced. "You're doing it wrong. Uncle Sungmo does it better now." "I've had more practice," Sungmo said, laughing, watching Bio's mock, offended expression with genuine warmth. Ndidi caught his eye across the room. Something settled and peaceful in her expression that hadn't been there even during their happiest moments. Before this entire ordeal began the particular, hard-won piece of finally knowing the complete truth, rather than carrying uncertain grief indefinitely. Later that evening, once the children were finally, exhaustedly asleep, Sungmo and Ndidi sat together on her small porch, the warm evening settling comfortably around them. "I need to ask you something," Sungmo said quietly. "What is it?" "I know we've been through an extraordinary amount together, in a relatively short time," he said carefully. "The mistaken identity, the truth about your husband, the danger these past few months. I don't want to rush anything given everything you've already navigated. But Ndidi, I want you to know clearly. I'm not interested in simply being someone who helped during a crisis and then quietly recedes once things return to normal. I want to build something permanent with you and the children whenever you feel ready for that conversation." Ndidi studied him for a long moment, something warm and certain settling into her tired, peaceful expression. "I think," she said slowly, "given everything we've survived together these past few months, the truth about Bio, my husband, about danger neither of us saw coming, I'm more ready for that conversation than you might expect." She reached for his hand. "Ask me properly, Sungmo, whenever you're ready. I have a feeling I already know what my answer will be." Sungmo felt something settle fully into place in his chest. 4 years of Ndidi's careful, quiet survival, and 6 months of his own unexpected, transformative love finally, genuinely arriving somewhere solid and lasting. "Soon," he promised. "Properly, exactly as you deserve. If this story finally gave you the clarity you'd been asking for since part 1, and then some genuine edge of your seat tension on top of it, drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. Mine's Dara's blunt question that started it all. Let me know where you're watching from too. Subscribe for more stories about love, truth, and the families we build along the way. See you in the next one.